Hi everyone. So today we're going to start a document for a dictionary file. We've already covered all of the terms that we are using in that dictionary. And so today we're going to be deciding what sizes we're going to use and how the design is going to look. So we're going to go ahead and kind of define that size first. One of the things that I would encourage you to do is fold paper down. You don't actually need a ton of space for this book. It is 2 pages per word, and so that leaves you a lot of flexibility. This can't be too small because there is one word or one page that will have flush left, flush right, and justified type as examples, and so you'll need enough space to do that in your design. But I'm going to start pretty conservatively. I'm going to, and you also need to have this fit within an 11 by 17 page because you're going to have to do front back printing on it. So I'm going to start pretty conservatively, a nice size. I'm going to go to File, and I know you can't see File, but we'll come down to File, down to New Document. And the first thing I'm going to do is set my document to be inches. And so I am going to work off a half a sheet of 8.5 by 11, which is 8.5 by 5. And I encourage you to write that down so that you will be able to, have it, in future. So I'm going to put 8.5. We're doing a vertical composition as well. We could have done a horizontal. A horizontal would have allowed us multi-column. A vertical is only going to allow us really a single column. So I'm going to put 5.5. And we are doing facing pages. It's probably best to go ahead and give yourself extra pages. It's a great time to talk about the fact that you can set your document up with multiple pages. So I'm going to go ahead and give myself 24 pages. Actually, I'm going to give myself 25 pages. One of the things that happens with Illustrator is it gives you a right page to start with, and then it goes into spreads. Spreads are 2 pages next to each other, and we need those 2-page spreads. My thoughts on using any of this is that I like to set those in my master pages. That way, if I want to set something up, that's a little bit different or change my design, I always have that flexibility. So that's all I need to do. I need to make sure that I come down and do 0, 0 here. And then I'm going to create. And you can see that we have that blank page right here, and then we go into our 2-page spread. And this is like if you open a magazine, this is what a 2-page spread would look like. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to come up here to a master. This is where we can set all of these things that will happen on every page. This is why InDesign is so much more effective than using a program like Illustrator or Photoshop, because you can set up these defined events that happen on each page and they get locked in. So we're going to come up here. The first thing we need to do is start thinking about our margins. So I've talked a lot about margins. Margins for a page are a little bit different than anything you've done in the past. And so really at this point, you do want to give yourself a ½ inch all the way, well, not all the way around. You're going to do it on the top and the left and the right sides. The bottom margin is a little different. The bottom margin visually has all of the weight of everything up here on it. So this space can look smaller. So it's typical to give yourself a little bit of extra. So this would give me 1 inch. That's a little bit too much, but 3/4 of an inch is a pretty standard amount for a margin. So that's what I'm going to give myself. The other thing is maybe I have information like, the title of my book down here or page numbers. We don't have a large book, so we don't necessarily have to do that, but we do have you know, the possibility that maybe we want to do that. Now, this is called a gutter. There are two different gutters in graphic design. There's a gutter between two columns within a page, and that's two columns of text, but there's also the gutter between two pages. So this is a really important thing to think about. We're going to be saddle stitching for the first time this book, and so I'm going to encourage you to have maybe a slightly smaller gutter than people have had in the past, but not too much. So we are going, you know, and with a saddle stitch, you can go slightly over. And this is, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5/8. Now down here, we were 3/4. If we were doing different kinds of publications, I might encourage a bigger space. So there we have our gutter. I'm just going to darken my screen a little bit. For some reason, oh, it's not working on here. So basically that's our setup, because as I mentioned, it's very, very difficult to have, you know, multi-column in something like this. The columns would be too small. Now I can do something interesting. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to say that I'm going to use this for like visual space and interest. So maybe I'm going to drop in, oops. Maybe I'm going to drop in 1 inch from here. So that would be right here. And this is going to be my column right here. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. And I'm just dragging from those sides in the same way that we did when you were pulling guides for Illustrator. I'm also going to give myself a 1/3, 2/3 kind of like line, because giving myself that allows me to know that if I work off that line, maybe I won't have such a centered kind of bland composition. And now, the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and start putting in some stuff that I know that is going to happen. You guys are going to be putting in 2 paragraphs on this left-hand side. So I'm going to drag 2 paragraphs. I'm going to go ahead and, for the time being, fill them with lorem ipsum. If I can find where lorem ipsum goes. Fill text with placeholder, right there. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually make that body copy. Remember, Illustrator, InDesign, Photoshop, for the most part, always brings your text in at 12 point. So I'm going to immediately drop it down to 9 point, which is typical body copy for most fonts. So I'm going to also come down here and drag myself another composition or another paragraph. I'm going to tighten this up. This is probably about the amount of space that I need. Now, I'm going to do a couple of things. Number one, I should set my font. Actually, I should have set my font before I did this, because then I'm not going to have to duplicate that information. So this is going to be your definition. So let's go ahead and use one of those words. Let's do kerning. And then we'll come back and get a definition for kerning. I'm going to go ahead and set the font. I'm going to go with my favorite, Frutiger. You know, we can use other fonts, but you know, for short amounts of text, we would want to either use a serif or a sans serif. If we were using a lot of text, if we were designing a book, we would want to go with a serif. But if we are not, we would probably want to stick to a sans serif. And that means that I can have a lot of interest all the way around without, kind of distracting from what I'm, my intention is. So I'm going to also put this in black so that we know that that's our definition. And at this point, I can go ahead and duplicate that. Now, the next thing I'm going to do, and I don't need you to write these because I'm going to search for typographic. I don't need you to write these because they already exist. And so what we're going to do is we're going to look for kerning in this dictionary. And this was just a search. So right there's kerning. You can see it's a very short explanation. So our page will need a lot of design elements since we only have a short amount of text. And then you're going to put a personal statement down here. And the personal statement is how kerning might affect your design. And I'm going to move this up. And I think probably one of the things that I would do is I would move this up and down. I want this column to kind of look a specific way. And so I'm going to go ahead and start with that. And this would be something that you would write. You don't have to write the dictionary, but you do need to write the personal statement. The personal statement is really your kind of understanding of how this term impacts and when you would use it. So we already talked about kerning. Kerning is something that you would do to a title. So you might talk about how, in designing a poster, handling kerning would be an important element because you would want to go in and make sure that the font was well done. And if it wasn't, that you would kern it. Expensive fonts tend to not necessarily need as much kerning. Cheap fonts or fonts that are completely free, you typically do need to do something with. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of start doing some things as well to my page. And this is probably going to be a two-parter. So the first thing I'm going to do is I don't necessarily think that I want my page to be like blaringly white. So I'm going to go ahead and give myself a box, and I'm going to come into swatches. I'm going to make it black, and then I'm going to do a tint of about 15% just to cut the intensity. And then I'm going to come up here to Object, Arrange, Send to Back. We've used this in Illustrator, so it's not something new to you. So we're going to go ahead and do that. While we're at it, I want to remind myself and you that we should always make sure that we have that bleed set up on your document. The one, actually, let's go back. You should actually set these up as individual pages because we're going to actually have to pull this document apart. So think of this as a war zone, and that you shouldn't have elements that cross this line. If you do, we can probably deal with it, but I'm going to just explain that in the future we're looking at this in what is referred to as reader spreads, how you read something. But when you go to produce this, you're going to do something called pagination, which is to put it in printer spreads so that it can be printed and bound properly. And it's not a complex thing to do, but it will take some time. So it's good that I reminded myself. Most of the time we are not dealing with pagination in projects, and it's typically not as complicated as a setup like this might be. So we're going to go ahead and We're going to think about how we want the design to look. I've decided I want a kind of a heavy bar right here. And I'm going to fill that with black. And that's going to kind of set the tone for our book. And over here are my examples. So I'm going to go ahead, and even though this is not the font size that I want, I'm going to use, so I'm going to put example of kerning over here. And I'm going to want that to like take up this whole space. And I'm going to have it happen so that it changes every time I change my word. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to increase kerning. You notice that the size dropped down and is not going from edge to edge. That's because I needed to pull my box a little more open. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that open a little bit. Now it's a little past that line. I want it to be right on that line. So I'm going to make it 30.5. Little known fact, actually I'm going to make it 30.7. Little known fact, you can do points, you know, for something like this. So this is going to be my example page. And I'm going to keep this fairly clean and simple. This is a dictionary, so you can make it interesting, but you don't necessarily have to go overboard. We as designers sometimes like to decorate, and that's completely fine as long as it, you know, stays within an appropriate level. Now I'm going to do something over here. I'm going to give myself a box just to play off of this line. And I'm going to fill that with black. I'm actually going to drop it a little bit further away from here because this is where I want my column to be. And I'm going to leave that right there. And actually, now that I think about it, I'm actually going to use this in a different way. I'm going to drop this size down a little bit because I want it to actually end right there instead of where I was intending to have it ended. That is plenty big enough. Now, I could add page numbers. I could add the title of my book. I'm not going to do any of that. I am going to kind of bring in some sense of play because since this is a K word, I'm going to use K to kind of make some visually interesting elements. And you can actually eyedropper a font. Oops. I can eyedropper that font so I get that same font. Not that I would have forgotten it, but you know, it's something to think about. Now I'm going to have a letter, the first letter of each one of these definitions kind of playfully kind of interact. Actually not so playfully, but still. One of the things that I personally love is Swiss modernist design, and they're kind of masters of scale and making something simple. So I'm going to go ahead, and each of these are going to be slightly different. I'm going to leave that right here at that size. I'm going to rotate it. Oops, rotate it one too many, and then I'm going to line it up here. And then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to start doing my example. Now, I'm going to leave this as is, and we're going to go into our pages now, because in our pages, we're going to see that everything that I've done here has shown up here. And that means that all I have to do is switch out my kerning definition, change it to another word, rewrite my personal statement, change this and change that, but I'm not having to build everything anew. And that's one of the things that's really nice about InDesign, is that we are creating this. I could create multiple versions of this, frankly. If I come up here, I can say new master page. It's going to come in as B or whatever I name it, and we could do something different. And so one of the reasons why that's interesting is, let's say I want a blank page here, I can do that. Or if I want to bring that back, I can do that. So it makes life a lot easier. Let's say you were designing a magazine and you had multiple grids happening because you had ads or you had table of contents. Somebody could build all of these great master pages, and every time you start that magazine anew, you would go to that template and you would use those master pages so that there was some consistency with the design. So I'm going to stop there, because the next things that we're going to do are we're going to start fleshing this out and going right down this this row of 2-page spreads and start making each of our pages unique. Oops.